Well, my body lies over the ocean. My body lies over the sea. Ooh, my body lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my body to me.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Scott Arizala Show, presented by CampHacker.tv. My name is Travis Allison, and with me, of course, is Scott. Scott, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Travis?
I am fantastic. I'm so glad to be getting started on our second season of the show. We got some great reviews from the stuff that we did last year.
Yeah, for sure. I'm super excited about this whole season. We've got a lot of really fun stuff to talk about. And actually, some of it is based on some of the feedback that we've gotten from shows from last season as well. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Fantastic. So my question to start us off today, Scott, is what makes a good camp counselor?
What makes a good camp counselor? We're going to actually do a number of episodes this season on counseling skills, on what makes a really great camp counselor. And I've been doing a lot of work in this area in the last year or two when it comes to trainings at camps and at conferences. And one of the things that has stood out as far as a sort of a skill, kind of almost a lost art, is this idea of noticing. And where this came from, actually, or where this idea really started to percolate for me, is a couple years ago when I was living in California, and we had our second child, and a dear friend of ours who had just graduated from college. She's actually my best friend's little sister. Came out to live with us for a couple of months to sort of help us get our feet under ourselves with our second kid. And she is an amazing camp counselor. She's actually went to the camp that I grew up at. She's worked at me for several of the camps that I run. And I'm sitting around one night at dinner with her. Her name is Maggie, and I basically just asked her, what do you think makes a good camp counselor? I mean, what are good camp counselors doing? What are they thinking? What makes a good camp counselor? And without taking a breath, she looks at me and she says, great camp counselors are always asking the question, what can I do to make this situation better? And she just stopped right there, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, because she's exactly right. We went on to talk about what that question really means. And in essence, what it means is a great camp counselor is always looking for action. What can I do right now? Of course, we're saying that when there's something going on, or somebody's falling apart, or there's an issue with behavior here, or kids aren't getting along, or whatever. Of course, when the negative stuff is going on. But the way she said it and the way we ended up talking about it was much more than just the negative stuff. It was all the time. It was, all the kids are doing just fine at arts and crafts, or they're all playing soccer, or whatever. What can I do to make this situation even better? What can I notice? Where can I spend my energy? Where should I be paying attention? It just, that question pushes and assumes action, which at the end of the day is what noticing as a counseling skill is really about.
Right. So that's our topic. We're going to talk about noticing the things that good counselors see around them and pick up on. And I know that you have some things to teach us about that, Scott, but I would back this right up and say, why don't we notice things anymore?
Sure. I think there's two problems. One, it's sort of the culture that we live in, and then two, I also think that there's the sort of mental space that adults live in often isn't the present. And the culture that we live in, there's something I've been talking about at conferences and at camps that I'm calling the cell phone syndrome. And it's just like, how do we receive information now? And it's really in this kind of free flow, these sort of snippets kind of flashing at us all the time, and we're just getting all these little pieces, so much so that we don't have to sort of stop, pay attention to what's going on in the moment, and then sort of consume it and move on. It's just a sort of this constant barrage of information, and there's a whole lot of levels that's great. In fact, I'm writing an article right now for Camping Magazine where I take the idea of that and say, how can we institute better communication at camp in person one-on-one based on how we talk to each other over Facebook or via Twitter or whatever. So I don't want this to sound like I'm sort of making this blanket statement that the way we're communicating is somehow bad. What I am saying, though, is that I think what it does is it decreases our ability to stay in this moment right now and with some depth and with some detail, notice what's going on because of the way sort of we're programmed now to sort of receive information. The second piece to that I was talking about is sort of where do we spend our mental energy? And if you really break down where you spend most of your mental energy, and most adults do, frankly, it's in sort of one of two places. It's sort of reliving, reviewing, going over what just happened, or it's sort of worrying about, preparing for, being anxious of what's going to happen in the future. And both of those things are incredibly adaptive. We want adults, particularly adults who work with kids, to be thinking about that, right? We want people to learn from what they've done in the past and not make the same mistakes or like do more of what went well in the past. And of course, we want adults to be prepared and thinking about the future and moving towards it and and all that kind of stuff. But of course, where do we spend actually all of our time, is right now. And anybody who's ever, been around kids, if you have your own kids, right? Like kids demand that you are sort of right here, right now. And I think because we spend our mental energy in one of these two places, it's a lot harder then to really be here right now and really notice what's going on. So I think that's what's happening, and I think that's why we maybe have to, as youth development professionals, kind of come back to an idea kind of as simple as this, to say, hey, how do we teach our young people, our frontline staff, to really notice kids' behavior, what they're doing, what they're going through, how they're being social, all that kind of stuff.
Well, is there something is there a certain kind of question or something, Scott, that the counselor should be asking to get to that awareness?
I think that's a good question. I think, one, the question that you can always ask of yourself is where we started, right? This, what can I do to make this situation better? Because I think that begs you paying attention to specific things. I think the technique that we can, as youth development professionals and as frontline staff, can use to help be in that moment with kids is to ask, frankly, Travis, any question. When we are engaging kids and when we are there on the ground asking them what they're doing, what they're making in art, or at arts and crafts, or, how that last, play went in soccer as you're standing over getting, a drink for the water break, just hanging out on the porch saying, how's your day been? I mean, any question that young people can come up with to ask kids, I think will keep them in the moment. Having said that, I do believe that asking open-ended questions versus yes or no questions versus maybe even leading questions, I think helps with the sort of spirit of what we're talking about, which is how can I kind of get where this kid is and then sort of stay with this kid as they sort of go through this train of thought or talk to them or talk to you about their different experiences. So along with questions, I think there are a number of other things that we can do to really help young people with this skill. I think one is just sort of the art of observing and the art of actually practicing that, like practice sitting down and like watching what kids are doing. And I think a good way for you to know that you're doing sort of a good job at that, or you're because it's easy to say, hey, I'm just sitting here, I'm watching the kids. But what can you what could you pass on? What could you say to, for example, your co-counselor or somebody else in the unit that may be responsible for these kids as well, to say, hey, these are the things that I noticed. This is what I watched happen when we were all going from arts and crafts to wood shop or whatever, or when we got to wood shop, here's what I noticed about who was working with who and who picked a project first and all that kind of stuff. I think those are the kinds of things that that we don't spend enough time on necessarily actually practicing and sort of thinking through as an actual skill. Part of asking really good questions, part of practicing that observation is watching body language. I think it falls falls into into the subset of skills under noticing that I think is so important. A good friend of mine, Steve McGuire, who's a summer camp consultant and trainer, he's sort of famous for doing something when he gets to camps, which is it falls totally on the line of understanding and watching body language. He'll basically come to your camp and he'll stand up in front of your staff and do a half day or day-long training or even just a couple of hours. And he'll, for the most part, be able to tell you with pretty kind of scary accuracy who is some of your best staff, who's some of your worst staff, where are some of the red flags, who's dating who, I mean, things like that. Things that there's, for most of us, there's just no way to tell, right? And if you really, I've had a number of conversations with Steve about this, and what he's doing is just sort of noticing body language. How are people leaning in? How are people paying attention? How are people listening? If you can take that idea and transcribe it onto a counselor with their kids, you can notice a lot by how kids are sitting, who they're talking to, what's the pace at which they're walking, all those kinds of things. And again, what does that do? It forces you to be sort of right in the moment and sort of present with all the different behaviors and what exactly is going on.
Doesn't he pass on any of his observations? I know that you said it's important to tell your co-counselor or whoever you're working with what you've seen. Does he do the same thing? Does he pass that on?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what Steve does, and that's, I think, the lesson that is so great from what Steve does to what we can teach our young people, because part of noticing is not necessarily just keeping it to yourself, right? I don't know a single camp counselor that works or lives in a bubble at camp, and if you do, then it's probably only you and a few kids, and it's not actually camp. That's called babysitting, right? No, most of us work in a group, and so therefore, one of the things that we have to get much better at is what I like to call sort of handoff comments, right? And it's not necessarily that you're handing the kids off. Sometimes you absolutely are, right? Sometimes you're literally handing a group of kids off from one person to the next. However, most of the time, what we're really talking about is just a group effort, 2 or 3 counselors, 10 or 12 kids, whatever your ratio is. And one of the things that I think you've got to keep in mind, and a great skill to support noticing, is these ideas of handoff comments, of what did I notice, what was going on, and the things that I can actually say to my co-counselors or whoever, hey, this is what I noticed and what's going on. Those are extremely helpful to your team, as well as keeps you right now in the present and knowing what's going on.
With all of the things that they're trying to watch and do their work, etc., there's a lot of things demanding their attention. How do you get them to get through that, to get to honest noticing the little things?
Well, Travis, we've got to teach young people to and ourselves too. By the way, we've got to be really good role models at this, and we've got to teach people how to just straight up remove the distractions. Some of them are easy, and a lot of camps have policies that dictate removing, your phones, your iPods, those kinds of distractions, the computer, all that kind of stuff. So those kinds of distractions I'm not necessarily talking about, although we definitely have to get good at removing those. I'm also talking about worrying about, a lot of us go to camp and it's a social experience. And so we are by nature, being social at camp, and we have to be able to compartmentalize those relationships and what's going on. And we just have to be really conscious at going, okay, what's happening with these kids right now? Okay, I'm concerned about this, I'm concerned about that, I see this over there, I have to plan for that. And so there's got to be some time management built in there. There's got to be some support system with whether it's your co-staff or your supervisors in place to allow you some time and space to do those kinds of things, because if not, what suffers? What suffers is right here and right now with kids. And that, again, I want to end it, Travis, by talking about what we talked about at the very beginning, which is, noticing and being a really great camp counselor is about action. You're doing something. And I think if you can remember that, and if you can really think in terms of what can I do right now to make this situation, these kids, this happenings better, then you're going to be in a really great position to affect not only great change at your camp, but unbelievable programming, and then, of course, so much fun for all the kids that come to your program.
Yeah, that makes sense, Scott. Well, thanks for sharing all this insight on this. It's I really appreciate your ability to think about the little things, Scott, and break it down for us and share that with the camp community. So I'm really grateful.
Thanks, Travis. Thank you. If you want to find out more about what I'm doing, please visit my website at thecampcounselor.com. You can check out more of what Travis does at camphacker.tv. And with that, I'd like to say thanks for watching, and we'll see you next summer.
Well, my body